The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics welcomes you to Adding It All Up, a podcast created by and for mathematics educators and teachers. Join us each month as we explore current topics, insights, and emerging trends with thought leaders in the math community. And now, the hosts of Adding It All Up, NCTM President Latrenda and NCTM President-elect Dewey Gottlieb.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Adding It All Up. Today, we want to start recognizing the incredible work teachers do every day. Teaching can be challenging with all the lesson planning, grading, managing a classroom, but it's also full of those wonderful moments that are deeply meaningful. For me, it's seeing a student have that aha moment or discovering a new way of thinking about a problem or a task. And those are the moments that remind us of why teaching matters and why teachers deserve constant appreciation, not just during 1 week or month in May.
Yeah, Latrenda, I couldn't agree more. For me, what sticks out the most are these everyday acts of care that teachers provide to students every day beyond just the lessons and the kind of the business of teaching, just checking in on students, being present for kids all the time. We all stay after school for so many hours to either help students get some additional support, tutoring them with math, or creating social opportunities for kids to connect. Teachers just do so much. They give so much. And I think we don't often realize the impact that we have. It's, we don't often perceive how profound our impact is on students. I remember one parent came to a parent teacher conference, parent night actually, and then she came up to me afterwards and she said that her child, she felt that her showing up to my class actually made a difference to me. So she liked coming to my class because it mattered. So the student actually perceived that I cared that she showed up every day. I heard parents that say that. I had no idea that that was something that this particular student felt or could even communicate to their parent. And that was one moment that personally I remember. And I know teachers all across this country and all across the world who do this have those moments that they impact children in ways they just don't realize.
That's so true. Sometimes it's just the little things that we do just intuitively that are important to us. And so it's not until maybe someone comes back and talks to you or mentions it that you realize what a huge impact those types of things had on a student or on a family or a parent. And so having taught for a long time and spent a lot of time working with students and working with their families, that sometimes you just do things because that's what you do. In my family, there are 5 kids. My parents had 5 daughters. So we're alike in a lot of ways, but we're very different in a lot of ways. And so when I started teaching, those are things that I brought to the classroom. And so I recall like parents sometimes would thank me for like to me something that seems like the smallest thing possible. And I would say, well, we're all people. And even though they're young people, they're people and just little things. I remember one year when I taught first grade, the one grade I never wanted to teach, but actually learned a lot from teaching it. One of my students, her sister, went to the restroom, but she somehow ended up in our classroom, invited her in. And so she kind of stayed for an hour. So I let the teacher know where she was. And then became a regular thing. And so the mom was like, that really means a lot to Annalise that you let her come. And I said, well, there's some reason that she needs to be here with us at this moment. I said, it's just an extra person. So if it means a lot to her and it's helpful to you and you're okay with it, it's not a problem for us because you never really know what it is that someone needs at that moment. Those are the things that make us happy, that are joyful about teaching. It's those human connections. So it's not just about the lessons and the activities you're delivering. It's really about the relationships that we build and the discoveries we make along the way.
Yeah, I mean, recognizing that daily dedication that teachers put into their work and their craft, the creativity we hope they feel that they can bring to their work and the care that they bring to their classrooms, it's so important. And that's why today's conversation feels so meaningful. We're going to explore this idea of the joy of teaching and how educators can find it, or if it's never been lost, kind of rediscover it or reignite it, their fulfillment and purpose. And so they find the joy and delight in their own work. We hope that part of our work as mathematics leaders is also finding ways for teachers to find their joy in their work with children and with mathematics. And I think it's important for children to see our teachers having joy, enjoying their work, and thriving as mathematics teachers. We want our children to see, like, hey, maybe that's something I want to do. That's what my teachers did for me. That's why I considered going into teaching. Is and it's important for teachers to find their joy in their work, not just for themselves, but also I think students need to see examples of adults thriving in their work and finding this worthwhile. So I'm really excited to have Francis Su as our guest today. I remember when his book Mathematics for Human Flourishing came out, and I read his book and I heard him present, and it just gave this message that I think it resonated so deeply with me. And I think there are so many messages that just teachers need to hear because we get so caught up in assessments and accountability and the business of schooling that sometimes this idea of who is mathematics for can get lost in all of that work despite our best intentions. So I was really grateful that Francis was able to spend some time with us today. He's thought very deeply about mathematics, this idea we keep mentioning joy, human flourishing. So I'm excited to hear his insights to help our listeners and our teachers consider ways that they can bring more joy and purpose into their classrooms. So everyone help me welcome Francis Su to the show. Francis, why don't you take a moment and tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would, please?
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here with you both. And I love talking about mathematics as a way to experience more of who we are as human beings. So, I'm a math professor at Harvey Mudd College in Southern California. It's a small science and engineering school. And I've been teaching here for a number of years. Some of my experiences around K through 12 education have, of course, come through my own experiences, but also for several years, I taught at a summer middle school math camp called MathPath. So that was a lot of fun. And for a little while, when I was a new assistant professor, I went to a local school and I taught an enrichment course for an eighth grade class. And so I actually learned quite a bit about teaching because, as I think all of us here know, it's a lot harder to keep the attention of an eighth grader than it is a college student. And so, in many ways, that was a very formative experience for me. But, anyways, it's great to be here with you both.
Francis, thanks so much for telling us a little bit about yourself. And I know exactly how you feel about keeping the attention of those adolescents as compared to our adult counterparts, but it keeps us on our toes, right? So, you often talk about math, how math can be a source of joy, not just a tool for getting the right answer. So, how can teachers experience and share that kind of joy in their own classrooms, even on some of those tough or busy days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the things that I am a big fan of as a professional practice is keeping a little record of things that think are beautiful or joyful so that I can share them with my students. So I have, when I first started teaching, I would start off every class with a 5 minute fun fact, something that is kind of a cool math fact that you can present in 5 minutes or less. And I used to keep a whole journal of ideas that I would just use so that I have something every day to show my kids. And it was a way of bringing a little lighthearted levity into the classroom, that showing kids something really cool that they don't have to learn because it's going to be on an exam, right? Like the idea that you could actually just enjoy a cool math idea. So, an example of this might be showing them a cool puzzle with an interesting solution, or it might be a quicker way to compute something than they might have seen before that uses symmetry, some ideas that they might find cool. And I think that's a way for teachers also then to get off on the right foot with the kids that day. Like often my students would say, "Oh, they look forward to the fun facts and missed it when we didn't do them."
It's a great way to personalize mathematics. It's not just happens between 11 and 12 each day, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and it also sends a signal that we are constantly learning new things and enjoying ideas, even if they're not directly related to the subject that you're teaching. Just showing some things that you found was cool, or maybe even it was a news item you saw that had math in it, right? Or something that was like, "Oh, this is pretty nifty." Like we have astronauts up in space right now, and they are circling the moon. I have a 5-year-old kid. He just asked me, he's like, doesn't the spaceship need fuel? Like, he saw the rocket boosters falling, right? And he was like, "Well, doesn't it need fuel for the rest of its journey?" I had a little moment where I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a really great question." And then I said, "Oh, it's basically from there, it's all gravity. Like it doesn't really need much fuel after that." And that's a mathematical law, right? Like you could have a little moment, just a brief moment where you just appreciate the wonder yourself and then model that for your students.
That's a great story. Yeah, and it kind of leads us right into the next question, because you've written a lot, about mathematics, how it contributes to human flourishing, beyond just grades and tests. How can teachers help themselves as well as their students connect with the deeper meaning and purpose behind learning mathematics?
What I recommend, and I try to do this, is to read popular books about math, ones that sort of give the big picture, that could give people a sense of like the awe inspiring wonder of math. A book I recommend, which has very little technical math in it, but is, I think, good at this, is a book by Steve Strogatz called Infinite Powers, where he talks about all the amazing things in our lives that are the result of knowing calculus, right? Like the amazing inventions and amazing ways of looking at the world. And this is a book that isn't very technical at all. So it's something you could read before bed, but give some big picture ideas. And I think it's a really good professional practice as teachers to just have some light reading. Another author I like a lot is Eugenia Chang, who I know has spoken at some NCTM conferences before.
She was the keynote at the annual meeting recently.
Yes, yes, and she teaches at an art institute, right? So she has an interesting audience and set of students that she has to make math exciting and relevant for, and so her books also have this quality of being easy to read, but also show the beauty and wonder of math. A book there that she's written is called How to Bake Pie, which you will find her on as a guest episode on Colbert if you look it up on YouTube.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, that's great. I'm gonna look for that for sure.
Registration is now open for the NCTM 2026 Annual Meeting and Exposition, happening October 28th to 31st in Denver. More than 5,000 math educators will gather around this year's theme: Mathematics for a Changing World, Belonging, Learning, and Leading, to share ideas that will help you thrive, create practical strategies for your classroom, use technology thoughtfully, and strengthen teaching for every student. Come for the ideas, leave with inspiration. Learn more and register at nctm.org/Denver 2026.
I love that example. I mean, especially somebody like me who loves to read. I always love the idea of mixing my math with my literature at the same time, especially if you can do it for joy. But one of the things that we know as educators, and we hope that we help our students to understand this, that struggling and making mistakes, that's a natural part of learning. And so when we think about our teachers in our classrooms, how can we help them model that in their classrooms to help students and really themselves, I guess, really understand that that's an important and natural part of learning, but how do they help to feel supported and encouraged so that students really see how we learn so much from our mistakes? And so that's really where the true learning takes place. How do we help them model those type of mindsets?
That's a great question. I've been thinking a lot about this recently because I've been trying to change my assessments. The things I do in my class, I say certain things, but if my assessments don't match what I say, then students get mixed signals. And so, one thing that I've been thinking about recently is just this idea of how you make this process of like figuring stuff out through making mistakes. Yeah, how do you make that visible? And how do you make that rewarded in some sense by me as a teacher, right? So, just give you an example, and maybe our listeners can think about how to adapt it in their own context. But for instance, I teach this class that is an advanced course on a subject called topology, which is a study of shapes and surfaces. And it's all like inquiry driven. So the class, basically students come in and they're doing presentations of something they thought about before they got to class. And one thing that I have started doing recently is incorporating. So when they come to class, they're always like trying to present something that's polished that they've thought of. And I thought that's cool, but it actually would be useful also for people to see that the process of doing math involves dead ends or making mistakes and going down paths that didn't work out. And so I built into the assessment structure that they have to at least 3 times during the semester come to class and present an idea they tried that didn't work and what they learned from it. I think that helped students realize that, like, hey, everybody here goes down dead ends. And the one thing I didn't anticipate was just this idea that there's often that one student that everybody regards as smart, and I'm putting that in air quotes. And one unexpected benefit was the fact that even that student now is showing things that they tried that didn't work. That's a model for everyone else because they're like, oh, even that person makes mistakes, right? And that's a learning opportunity as well. So I really like this idea of actually figuring out how to make that kind of thinking visible because it's not often visible and then people don't realize that it is part of what we're doing in learning math.
Thanks, Francis. I absolutely loved that example you gave. Really kind of gets to this idea of showing that mathematics is a human endeavor and that as we're engaging with it, no matter how we perceive ourselves as mathematics learners or perceive others, that example you gave just really kind of humanizes that experience. And, you know, uh, so when we talk about students and teachers' experiences, mathematics, it can often feel solitary. It can be an isolated experience. How might teachers bring more joy, wonder, creativity, or even playfulness into their classrooms to create a sense of connection and community?
Yeah, so I think it's a important question, and I think part of the challenge is that we often do things in the classroom where students are acting alone, right? Like we ask them to do their homework alone, we ask them to think through problems alone, and I think alone time is actually useful. It's an important piece where we want students to not totally be relying on others. But I guess one thing that I try to think about is what are some of the barriers to community in the classroom? And how do I overcome that as a teacher? So, for instance, one of the barriers is this idea of making mistakes. And another barrier might be like, oh, I feel like I don't have anything important to contribute here, so I won't speak up. Another barrier is just not feeling familiar with other people, like, not feeling safe with other people, at least safe yet, because maybe we don't know each other that well. And maybe the safety thing is also at the K through 12 level, often kids had never know each other maybe too well, right? And so in some sense, it could be like they've had a whole set of experiences with certain other people that makes them feel unsafe and not wanting to contribute. So these are all kinds of things that as a teacher I try to think about. And so one of the things that I do on the first day of class in several of my courses is to have the students together think about some of these questions. So for instance, I might get them in the first day of class to break into groups and discuss a few questions. Like a question I might ask is, well, I'll tell you one, this may not be so relevant for this conversation, then I'll tell you a few others. One I'll ask them is, what do you reasonably expect to remember in your courses, in your college courses, in my case, 30 years from now? Okay, so that's one question. They'll discuss it for a little while. The reason I ask that question is I want them to think a little bit about what contributes to them remembering the stuff. Because 30 years from now, you're not going to remember a lot. You won't remember particular things, but I hope that they'll begin to think, oh, actually, I'll remember the things that I discovered myself, right? Or I'll remember how this class made me feel. I'll remember more about the process of learning than the actual specific skills that I learned. Maybe your mileage may vary on that question with a younger audience than mine. This is sort of setting the stage, right? And then part of the next questions I ask them to discuss is how do we create an environment in this class where risk taking is rewarded and mistakes are encouraged? Because I want them to think about some of this is not just the teacher's responsibility, but my responsibility. Like, how do I help my peers make this an environment where that's okay? That's trying to lower the barriers where people are actually talking about the kinds of interactions we're going to have in this class. I think having some good questions at the beginning of the year where students think about this would be really valuable.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think that's super helpful, and particularly starting the school year with those types of conversations. It also, I think, eases students into the course, into learning the mathematics without starting, being a bit non-curricular, if you will. Is non-academic, but still having this conversation in that light. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And so much of this experience that we create for our students is really about how you make them feel a certain way. Like we want playfulness in the classroom, and if that's the case, then we got to give students the permission to play, right? And what does that look like? So that means giving them creative, interesting, open-ended problems where there isn't just one right answer. Like it could be use the ideas we did in class today to create a piece of art that exemplifies whatever it is, geometry, or maybe it's parametric curves in calculus, like figuring out how to write your name in using some of the math you're learning today. So that there isn't one right way and everybody has a way of expressing themselves in making this material feel more alive and more human to their experiences and the kinds of things they might want to do.
This has been a delightful conversation. And to be completely honest, I feel as if you have answered my next question, but I'm going to ask you to elaborate on it a little bit more because we've been talking about the humanizing part of just teaching and learning in respect to mathematics. And so, as we've all acknowledged, teaching encompasses so many things other than just, oh, I'm delivering this content for this moment, for this hour, this minute. But there will be some people who may ask, why is it important? Why is this work in particular meaningful and rewarding when we think about teaching? So, based on some of the things that you've shared with us already and your experience, why is it important that as teachers, we actually hone in on this component when we start thinking about our work with our students?
Yeah. I guess I would say that the brief answer to that question is that we're forming human souls. Like we are forming human people. And if we keep that in mind, then what does that mean? That means that we need to pay attention to the ways in which students are being formed, not just the content they're learning, right? Like maybe the content is whatever it is you're teaching, trigonometry. If we think a little bit about this, trigonometry isn't something that very many of us use every single day. So if kids ask the question, why do I need to know this stuff? It's not really a truthful answer to say you're because you're going to need to know it later. Now, we want people to be able to know trig, certainly practically, if some of them become scientists, but not everybody's going to become a scientist. Okay. So I think we need to give students better answers to that question. And a better answer to that question is because we're forming you with certain human qualities, the ability to reason, the ability to think, the ability to sit and struggle with hard problems. And sit and struggling with hard problems is something you're going to do the rest of your life, no matter what you encounter. And part of what you're learning to do when you sit with a hard problem and sometimes eventually solve it is we're equipping you with life virtues, right? That ability to sit with a hard problem is going to serve you well no matter what you do in life and in every career. And this is part of the message that we have to send our kids is like, we're helping you live into your humanness and be able to flourish because of it.
I love that. I love that. And that's what makes it rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, I want to have a vision for them that when they leave my class, they are now better equipped to handle a world that is frankly going to be tough. And they're going to be hit at all sides with information and misinformation, and I want them to be able to sort it all out. I want them to be able to think critically about what they're being told, so they don't need to rely on authority to tell them what's true and what's right. They can actually sit there and figure it out, right? I'm hoping that they're not gonna be just listening to some authority. I want them to say, "No, actually, what that person said isn't quite right." And math is one of the best ways to help kids do that, among other things.
We need them to be connoisseurs so that they can actually make choices for themselves and critique things that are being given to them. I love that.
Francis, this notion of flourishing in mathematics, it's not something that is kind of encapsulated as a singular moment in time, right? Or it happens, or it's the manifestation of because of one activity or one act that happens in a classroom, for example. I love how you talk about it's a sustained effort. It's sustaining that purpose and that joy over a longer period of time. So thinking about our audience and our teachers who are listening, what practices or perspectives or habits can help teachers maintain that sense of joy and purpose or growth over the long term?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. One piece of that, in terms of just the joy, is this idea we talked about earlier of maintaining a practice of keeping up with one's trade, right? Like doing some light reading around mathematics. But in terms of like the sustaining the day to day hard work, like in my most discouraging moments, I try to think of that student who I've had a significant, meaningful connection with. And maybe it's a connection over doing something hard, helping them through a hard moment in their life, and then having the joy. Now that I've been teaching a number of years, I've had the joy of seeing these students now that they've gone off into the world and they're doing something pretty cool. And I'm not worried about them anymore. That kind of thing. Like where you say, gosh, the long journey actually has resulted in something, in a flourishing student. I remember when I was new to teaching, I was worried about lots of little things. I was worried about the C student, right? I'm worried that they're never going to accomplish their dreams or whatever. And then years later, I find out he's like a doctor and he's doing well. Not that being a doctor is like the pinnacle of anything, but like that was his dream. And I thought like, oh no, he's going to get a C in this class and it's going to affect him the rest of his life. I was worried about stuff like that. I just realized the things I think are important really aren't as important as I think they are. I think what mattered more for this student was the fact that he had an enjoyable experience in math. He had a positive experience, even if he got a C, and it didn't deter him from becoming the doctor he wanted to be later. I was so focused on the fact, and students are like this too. They're like, "Oh, if this grade is really the most important thing in this class." And now I tell my students, "No, no, it's not the grade. If you leave my class with the idea that the grade's the most important thing, then I failed you, right? This is part of the message I want my students to have." And I know it's really hard. I know people think grades are everything. And I want them to get away from that feeling like, hey, a grade is a snapshot of progress. It's an imperfect measure of what you know, but it's not your trajectory. It's not your slope. It's not who you are.
Yeah, as you were talking, it reminded me of a former student of mine. She was fantastic human being in general, but a mathematics student. She had a 5 on her AP exam. She was one of the valedictorians of her graduating class. She went to a very great school in another school in California to be an engineer. And she wrote me a letter after her first semester in college saying that as well as she did in high school, she felt it did not prepare her for college, for that particular school. I was like, what do you mean? How is that possible? But it was the first time for her where she was struggling in a math class because she was having to solve unconventional problems and wasn't giving a path from the starting point to the end. And then she was among peers who were her equal, and just her being in that uncomfortable space for that one moment, or maybe for a few semesters, I think that was part of her journey. It's like you said, it didn't define her trajectory for the rest of her studies or her career, but I think it was the space she needed to be in at that point.
And that's a perfect example of Francis saying earlier how we want our students to have that takeaway that I can do hard things because I'm going to have hard challenges to do no matter what. So giving them the opportunity to experience that throughout their K-12 so that they always bring that with them. So this has been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for being here for our listeners. We want to thank our listeners for joining us in this episode as always. And for all of those teachers who are tuning in, we definitely want to say we want to wish you a very happy Teacher Appreciation Week. And just remember that you deserve recognition, not for a single day, not for a single week, but always for all of the incredible work that you do. And to remind you to join us next month for another incredible episode. But thank you so much for joining us for this very special time for this time of year for all educators. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Adding It All Up. At NCTM, we strive to bring you the biggest topics happening in mathematics. Join us next month for another exciting discussion.